discovering and rediscovering the new cannabis culture. A lot has changed. She is a contributor to Forbes.com and other publications on this topic and is working on the book. She lived in Israel for 30 years, where she worked as a copywriter during the Startup Nation heyday. Thank you, Abby. I'd also like to invite Brenda Smith up. As founder of CB Capital Concierge, Brenda has parlayed her skills in capital markets and business strategy to furthering commerce and scientific discovery in the legal cannabis industry. She has raised over $250 million in private capital over the past 5 years alone and facilitated strategic alliances, mergers and acquisitions, and consolidation in the cannabis industry. Thank you, Brenda. So we got some Israelis, some Americans, some writers, some investors, we got a nice mix of people here. And I'm totally stealing this question from the CEO, slipping my mind, of the Grasslands Agency. So I want you guys to say your name and what your cannabis story is.
Okay, so I start. Like any other Israeli, after my military service, I went to Southeast Asia, and that's how my cannabis journey started 20 years ago. Thanks to Sid and Tikkun Olam, my cannabis journey continued while in Israel, although I'm not supposed to say that. Yeah, as a user, I've been doing it for 20 years. I think that nowadays it's okay to say such a thing in a legal firm office. And I left the medtech world a year ago, and I was basically fed up with the duration of and length of processes, and I was looking for something else. And I think that cannabis was a great segue for me and for our partners, as I said, to bring Israeli technologies here to the US. So that's my story.
My story is I'm a pharmacologist. I worked at a hedge fund for about 20 years, and someone asked me if I wanted to be the CEO of a cannabis company, and I said, Canada, you get high, you feel better. So what am I going to bring to the table here? I grew up in the East Village, so I know a little bit about cannabis, but I never thought, what do you do? But they said you have to go to Israel and you have to talk to Rafi Shalom and then you'll see there's actually more to this cannabis story. I'm happy I did. There really is something with this cannabis that really will help people. Maybe not, maybe in the next 5 or 6 years, I think we'll see. I mean, I've seen it myself. I've seen people benefit from cannabis. I've come a long way from where I started. And now I believe that we'll see some. We just got approval of Epidiolex for epilepsy, and I think you'll see further approvals and cannabis being used to help people going forward.
So this really isn't my story, it's actually my brother's story. And I got interested in cannabis investing about 7 years ago because I really didn't like smoking weed. But my brother did. And he did most of his life. And when he was 36, he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. And you don't understand the force of life that keeps you alive and keeps you going. But and I'm giving this in hindsight because when I thought about what my story was, this is how it came together. He knew there was no cure for ALS, but he went to Germany and he had blood chelation done. He went to the dentist and had his fillings removed, his mercury fillings removed from his teeth. He did bee sting therapy, he ate wheatgrass, and he smoked pot. And it never all came together for me. I thought cannabis was kind of interesting because it was a healing plant, and I was a gardener, and I thought it was kind of interesting. And I didn't really know the medical side. I knew the social lubricant side. And so when I started to put all this together and I started to read about Parkinson's, which is a neurodegenerative disease and a precursor. In many cases, they think the gene is related to ALS. I started to realize that I wasn't going to do another ALS walk, to raise funds, or I wasn't gonna do another auction. And I'm certainly not convinced that I'm gonna find a cure for anything. But if I can help move the industry forward and help people understand what's possible here from a healing standpoint, I think that's something I could do for my brother's legacy.
Thank you. Sarah said that I lived in Israel for 30 years. It's true. I moved there in 1986, and it was just the time when a lot of high-tech companies were launching. There was a big need for native English-speaking writers, and so I started a copywriting business, and I worked for many. I started out with computer communications companies, then I moved on to a lot of biotech companies. I worked with a lot of medical researchers, the Technion Faculty of Medicine at Rambam Hospital in Haifa. And I also developed an interest in traditional foodways of the Galilee, and I wrote about that. I wrote magazine articles, I wrote a book. And in 2015, when my youngest son finished the army, I decided it was time to come home. I wanted to come back to the United States. My parents were getting old, and I picked up and came back. So I'm a writer, I had to find work, and I went to a job interview at Jefferson University in Philadelphia. And as I was preparing for my job interview, and I looked at their website, I saw that they have a medical marijuana research institute. And I went, oh, isn't that interesting? And on their site, there was a link to an article from Rolling Stone magazine. And it said, it said, Israel is the #1 global cannabis research center. And I went, what? I had been writing about medical research in Israel for years, and I didn't know anything about it. Now, of course, I understand now that in the cannabis industry, every year is like a dog year. So the 2 years that I've been away was like the equivalent of an eternity. And so I spoke to my son, who at the time was a student at the Technion, and I said, did you know, Daniel, that Israel is a global capital for cannabis research? And he said, oh yeah, Mom, you know, Professor Meshulam, he's the one who identified THC. And I said, really? And so he sent me a link to a lecture, and I listened to the whole lecture, and it was that moment. It was the moment where the light bulb went on, and I said, I have to be involved in this. I've written about Israeli medical research for so long. Here, I've got to get involved in this. So I felt like I had to get some skin in the game, and I went to Canatech last year, just this time, and I met Bobby there, and it was right, and yes. And I met Constance there, and so I was in, and it was just a matter of finding how I was going to make this happen. And so I worked long and hard. I knocked down a lot of doors, and finally, just to compress the whole long story, I got my big break, and I got accepted to be a contributor at Forbes.com about writing. And my swim lane is what they call it, is about cannabis and baby boomers and the elder population. But I do have a very warm place in my heart for Israeli medical research. And one of my recent articles, which is the reason that Sarah invited me tonight, is I wrote about the recent studies that Tikkun Olam did. I was just in Israel. And so I wrote about Israeli medical research, some of the newest findings. So that's how I got to cannabis.
Great, and my name is Sarah, and my cannabis story is that I am a nice Jewish girl that was graduating with my MBA, that was tired of injecting myself with Humira because I have psoriatic arthritis. And I visited Denver to look at some startups out there. I had a snickerdoodle cookie and a solve, and my pain was gone. And I said, all right, this is what I want to do with my life. So I moved out to Denver, had a job, and now I'm in New York here in front of all you lovely people. So I want to go back to Sid. You spent some time doing trials here in the United States, right? Just Israel. Oh, even better. What was that process like? And what did you learn going through that process?
Well, first of all, everybody thinks doing trials in Israel is easy. It's not easy. Nobody's ever ready to get involved with the Israeli Ministry of Health. And in order to do a trial in Israel, you have to go through 3 steps. The CAR is the organization of the Ministry of Health deals with cannabis. So first you have to get approval from the car, then you have to get the IRB approval, which is, then you have to get approval from the Ministry of Health. And if you get all those three approvals, you can start your trial. We've managed to do that on a number of levels. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's hard. I'm sure everybody who's been to Israel knows the bureaucracy is not easy in Israel. But we managed to work through that, and we managed to get three trials started, and we're working our way through the system. But I think Israel, it gives you the opportunity to do the trials. In the U.S. still, I mean, there's so many people that have called me that wanted to do trials, and there was a senior citizen center where I knew the health director, and he said, I have 9 patients on cannabis, they're all doing great. How do we get this done? And to be honest with you, I tried, we weren't able to do it. So hopefully, in the near future, it will be easier to do trials in the US. But for now, we're doing them in Israel, and Israel, the trials are fine.
Let's stick with Israel and, pardon? I'm asking first, thank you. Your time will come. So I want to stick with Israel and the Israeli medical cannabis market. Abby, you just wrote a fantastic article on Forbes about this. What was it like being exposed to that, and what did you learn from that?
Well, I've been exposed to as I mentioned, I've been exposed to the medical cannabis, the medical research field for decades, in fact. And so I was just in Israel last month, and I met with the Tikkun Olam people in Tel Aviv, but I also had the opportunity to go to Jerusalem and meet with Professor Meshulam for another article that I'm doing. And I had the chance to ask him, what did you feel like was the most important or meaningful part of your long career? And he didn't really want to talk about cannabis very much. He wasn't, it's like, but he said it was really the discovery of the contribution of my discoveries to understanding the endocannabinoid system. And I think that for everyone who's in the medical cannabis world, the understanding of the potential of the endocannabinoid system and the myriad ways that it can be taken advantage of or developed for so many different conditions is a very exciting prospect. The other thing that comes to mind when we talk about Israeli researchers is I had the chance through my son who happened to say, oh, Mom, my biology professor at the Technion has a huge cannabis lab. Would you like to meet him? And I said, yeah, sure, of course I'd like to meet him. And it was Dedi Meiri. So this was a year ago when I was in Israel, and we sat and had an amazing conversation. And he said that, he just was kind of scratching his head in disbelief, like everyone else. Like, how did this all develop so fast? But he said something like, my lab has about 20% of the entire research budget of the Technion in his lab alone. There's a lot of money in that, in the cannabis research. And in his lab, which is so very, very promising for cancer research. And one interesting thing, and then I'll end. I think that he really embodies what's unique about cannabis research in Israel. He does the basic science, so he's really doing, at the molecular level, looking at the different strains. He's quantifying the different compounds and looking at very, very small differences between them to see what they're doing on different cancer cells. But he's also working with oncologists in the different hospitals that are calling and saying, I have a patient with this, and what strain should I give them? So I think it's that very small country where everyone knows each other, and they can, there's like a dialogue between these people, and I think that's really unique.
We've been told that some of the best due diligence in Israel is just asking around. Hey, do you know this guy? Do you know this guy? Because everybody knows each other. It's the size of New Jersey. right? Around 6 million people. I want to actually, New Jersey, let's talk about New Jersey. Guy, your incubator is bringing Israeli tech here. What sort of tech are they bringing? And what do you see happening from that?
Well, there are about 100 cannabis tech companies, give and take, in Israel right now, which is a very significant number compared to the age of the industry. It's not as big as cyber, it's not as big as life science, but it's starting to pick up. A lot of people like myself, coming from life science and just trying to move into cannabis to get a more practical route into the market. We work with various companies that you can say eclectic, you can say other things about them, but we try to find companies that have a tangible product. And when I say a tangible product, we are looking for products that are with a relatively short time to market. So even the things that we are doing in medical cannabis, we are looking at things in applications in pain management that will not require the full process of the R&D and the clinical development that is years and millions of dollars away. We try to find the right products, the right entrepreneurs that have something that can be put in the market within 12 to 24 months. We have products in the area of cultivation, IoT sensors. We have products that do big data analytics on personalized medicine for cannabis patients. We have a digital marketplace that does advertising and clinical education, not necessarily for medical, but also for rec. And we have a couple of other products in the pipeline. So it's the main thing that is common between all of these companies is that there is a very clear, well-defined, and relatively short path to the market. So we didn't want to play in the game where for example, is where it takes a lot of time and a lot of money. We took a more practical and pragmatic approach. Maybe again, I'm gun shy and traumatized after 17 years in life science, but I wanted something that I wanted to do something that will have almost immediate or short-term impact on the market, and that's our main inclusion criteria for accepting products and technologies.
Awesome. So I want to ask one more question and then we'll open it up. So Brenda, can you speak about investor sentiment when it comes to cannabis for both Israel and the United States?
That's a very loaded question.
You bet.
So I can say, living in New York, that some people who would never invest in cannabis would invest in Israel. And it opens up a discussion that may not have otherwise opened up. I think there are markets out there like foundations, private foundations in particular, that have passions around cancer and Parkinson's disease and PTSD and a number of other things that would transcend the cannabis stigma in order to invest in something like Israel. I don't know that I would go the other way. I mean, I think we all know the sentiment of people in the U.S. I think it's different. Some people like it, some people don't like it, some people want to invest, some people don't, some people want to wait until it gets federally legal. The one thing I would say, I always think about an investment in the broadest sense, and years ago I was working with Carnegie Mellon and the Technion in an exchange program between the two universities. And I think investment is not just about dollars, it's about strategic alliances and opportunities in markets. I know this is going back a ways, but I know that Israel companies, and please add in if you want to. Israel companies want access to US markets, not just for capital. They want access to strategic opportunities and alliances and things that only this market can give them. And I believe because of cannabis that a lot of US cannabis, both investors and operators, want access to Israel opportunities that we don't have here as well. So I would just define it very, very broadly and see that as part of the opportunity.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up to questions. All right.
She's ready.
She's been ready.
Hi, Sid, I'm Bobby Paley. I'm just going on the Married Men board, and I think we do have an alliance with you in Delaware, so I'd like to know more about it.
That's a recreational alliance. I don't get involved with that. I just do the pharmaceutical side.
So where do you have alliances that are medical?
Right now we don't have any. We're doing our studies on our own, and we're getting out there, and the more studies we do, eventually we will have alliances. We've been approached, but at this point we don't have it. We have alliance with Married Men, and I know stuff, but I don't really know how that's going.
Well, let's continue the conversation.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question? Please.
In terms of doing clinical studies, is it any easier now to do anything in Colombia or Uruguay versus just Israel?
You can do stuff in Colombia, Uruguay, but I don't think anybody will believe your stuff. So you
Or
might as well.
Canada?
Canada, yeah. We're going to start doing some studies in Canada now in the next 6 months. So we are going to do Canadian studies. I think with the legalization there, it's a very, very good place to do studies, and we're going to start doing them in Canada.
Can you talk a little bit about believing the studies that are coming out of Israel?
Israel is an FDA-approved country, so when you do study in Israel, I mean, you have credibility. I mean, I was working on Wall Street for 20 years. You told me the study was coming out of Colombia. I wouldn't even look at it. Until the studies come out of Israel, it's a significant study.
Can you talk a little about the state of research on entourage effect and its relationship to all these issues?
That's always a sticky subject, is synthetic versus botanical. And if you talk to the people in Israel, especially Rafi Shulam, he's a big believer in botanical. So that means something. I'm a believer in botanical. I think the terpenes, and now we're finding out about CBG and CBN. I think it's hard. It's very hard to go against the study about the entourage effect. I think it's out there. I think it's an important part of cannabis, but have we done specific? All our studies are done with botanical products, so we are trying to take advantage of the entourage effect. But are there specific studies? You know, if you're doing studies in terms of patenting your product, synthetic is better because you make the molecule in the lab and you can patent it. But in terms of, I think, but we've seen some studies in epilepsy that have failed with synthetic. And obviously we know that the botanical have succeeded. So it's still out there, but there hasn't been any real research to say that the botanical and the entourage effect, but it's well known. What was your first product? Autism? Opioid use, yeah. So we're going to be starting some studies on that, but in our study on the palliative care of cancer pain, after 6 months of cannabis, 36% of the patients stopped taking opioids, and another 9% reduced their dosage. So based on that, we're going to start doing. I mean, it's very clear to me that if you have a motivated patient who wants to get on opioids, cannabis is probably the best choice. If you have someone who's not motivated, you might as well not even start. But I've discussed it with some pain management people in this country. And hopefully, with the political environment we have here today and the problem we have with people dying every day, that we will get a chance to do that study in the U.S. Post-traumatic stress syndrome, we have some preliminary data. I've tried to stay away from all kind of psychiatric studies because, the psychosis, and it just came out recently, 30 people who take a lot of cannabis can get psychosis. I didn't want to have the problem of someone with with a psychiatric disease kind of developing psychosis from the
Great. Is there anything each panelist wants to leave the audience with? Any words of wisdom? Anything that you've learned through your research, your business, what you're seeing? Please.
Yeah, so we talked about investments in Israel and in cannabis. And I think that in many ways it's a mirror image of what's happening in life science. In life science, US investors are looking for, and the FDA are looking for US data. And honestly, when you come with like data that was collected in Israel, they will say, yeah, okay, nice. What have you done in the US? With cannabis or with medical cannabis, it's the other way around. Because you can barely do anything in the US from a clinical perspective. A lot of clinical validation is being done in Israel. And it's not, as Sid said, it's not that Israel is like the easiest place to do a clinical study in general and to do a cannabis clinical study, but at least at the end of the day, you can still do it. So you see a lot of data that is coming from Israel that, you know, in other areas in pharma that would never happen. And same goes with investors. Usually, so I raised money in my past, I'm raising money now. And usually when I used to pitch US investors about my company and my pitch and what I do, they say, okay, that's nice. We are not investing in a non-US entity. Can you flip? Can you move the company? Can you do this? Can you do that? In cannabis, it's the other way around. Like investors are looking for the Israeli innovation, for the Israeli tech. They would never do this if it was a drug that was treating epilepsy that without any cannabis. I doubt that most of the investors that are talking with Sid folks would talk with him. But with cannabis, because of the limitations, because of the good reputation that Israel has in cannabis, a lot of investors are looking into this marketplace, into this area, are looking to invest. And a lot of people are looking at the clinical data that is generated in Israel. For me, that's like amazing. I mean, again, I'm coming from a similar industry, which is in many ways the opposite of what's happening in cannabis in the last couple of years.
I can only say that, like, when I started in this cannabis, I really didn't believe much about it. In the 3 years I've been involved, I've seen the cannabis help people. I've also seen a lot of snake oil people that are trying to push cannabis being good for everything. I think what has to happen is we have to do clinical trials. And with clinical trials, the mainstream physicians will see data, and I think that will turn the corner on cannabis being good for the diseases that we did the trials for. Unfortunately, no drug is good for everything, but I think what got me involved in cannabis is the low toxicity and the low side effects. And I think with the risk reward, I think we're in a good position over the next couple of years to see cannabis being used in many diseases.
I guess my insight probably is for investors. I talk to investors every day, 3, 4, 12 times a day. I look at 15 to 20 decks every week. And I would just say to investors that this anxiety that's out there, and I'm seeing it, low-level anxiety of, I call it fear of missing out, FOMO, because they want to get in. And I think there's a little bit of diligence that needs to happen in terms of what you get into, because each one of us is playing a bigger role in moving this industry forward. And where you put your dollars, what you put your dollars behind is going to move it forward. You want to win and you want that company to win. So I would just say, look at strategy, look at the team, look at the IP. If you don't know it, talk to somebody who does. It's a wonderful, wonderful community we're part of. There's a lot of energy here. There's a lot of eagerness to learn and a lot of resources in the room. So, network and find those people that can help you and put your money where it's going to move the industry forward. That would be what I would say.
So in my article that I wrote about Israeli research, I said that, in my opinion, Israeli clinical data is Israel's most important cannabis export. And I believe that as long as cannabis is a Schedule I controlled substance in the United States, it will continue to be the most important export. There's a lot of great tech people in Israel that, there's that very innovative Israeli spirit and creativity. There's plenty of that here, but Israel's got the capacity to do the research, and it's just the researchers' hands are tied here. And so this is the strategic advantage. It's a window, and I think that it has to be appreciated. So that's my insight.
All right, give it up for our panel. Thank you guys so much. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Like I said, you guys are rock stars. Network with each other. Make some deals happen. If you're interested in joining ICA, please find me. Please support us. Thank you. Have a great night.